Let's talk about Bitcoin, shall we? It's got the wise men of the investing world divided right now. On one side, you got heavy hitters like Warren Buffett and economist Paul Krugman thinking that the cryptocurrency is nothing but trouble. On the other side, you have venture capitalists like Mark Andreessen and jack of all trades Richard Branson coming out in support of Bitcoin.
You can also add Legg Mason's Bill Miller to the list of investors who like it or at least see the potential. I spoke to him about Bitcoin yesterday, and here's a reminder of what he had to say.
It's like a venture investment. Many of them don't work out. But the thing about Bitcoin, which is so interesting, is the addressable market here is as big an addressable market as there has ever been in the history of the world. So gold alone has an $8 trillion market value. Bitcoin has about a $7 billion market value. If it's only 10% successful as gold, it's 100 times your money.
So will Bitcoin net investors big returns? Joining us with more is Stephen Perry. He's co-founder and chief technical officer at BitPay. Also with us, CNBC contributor Ron Insana, who is no fan of Bitcoin. Is that right, Ron?
That is correct, Kelly.
And why? Now let me put it this way: is it because you have some aversion to it, almost like a moral or aversion, or is
No.
it because you don't think it's a good investment?
Well, first of all, I mean, I guess we have to separate this into two arguments. As an investment, I think it's bubble-like, and it's already proven that the volatility and the highs and lows we've seen are very much speculative. I think the bigger question is whether or not it's a currency, and I think for something to become money, it usually requires not only some sort of backing. The U.S. dollar has a $17 trillion
But Ron,
economy.
That's not the argument Bill Miller is making. He says it's not about it being a currency, it's about it being a commodity like gold.
Well, and it may very well be. Now, I would think it's much more speculative, and I would certainly, as an investment, it's not my favorite thing in the world. No, I would shun it in that regard. Yeah.
Stephen, I'm on that dual track idea that Ron's on at the same time. I mean, we're talking about either a concept of a virtual currency, which I believe is what the proponents like you are in favor of, but then at the same time, we're maybe clouding the issue is this complicated history that Bitcoin has been through on the various exchanges, the wild price swings that made it feel like this tulip mania through the whole thing. Has that gotten in the way of the concept of this virtual currency, do you think?
Well, perhaps to a degree. I do think that people tend to focus too much on the price and not enough on the utility of the technology. So while the price movements tend to be indicative of an early market, people need to remind themselves of what you can actually do with the technology.
Well, and that brings an interesting point, Stephen, where there's a great note from a UBS analyst today, among others, weighing in on this, thinking through what Bitcoin actually is. And one of the conclusions he kind of points to is that there are maybe some problems with Bitcoin itself, but technologies in kind of the realm of internet money, if you would, that will ultimately be adopted by a number of players. So how much do you think this is about Bitcoin specifically, or about this sort of innovation that's happening with online currency generally?
Well, it's about both. I think that a lot of people make the argument that there will be something that comes after Bitcoin, but I don't know what that is. They rarely specify what's going to come after. And, is it Litecoin? Is it IO coin, Solid coin, IX coin, Peer coin? I mean, there's a lot of them. And I don't see any of them rising to the challenge and really overtaking Bitcoin.
There is this issue, especially with regard to the merchant, Stephen, of the, correct me if I'm wrong here, it's all very difficult to understand sometimes. There's a fraud gap, a 10-minute gap potentially between the time you make or buy something and it's verified by Bitcoin for, say, a merchant. So during that window, that potentially up to a 10-minute window, that merchant is assuming the counterparty risk unless I stay in the store, and who wants to stay in a place for 10 minutes to make sure it all gets figured out?
Well, that's what services like BitPay address. We take care of that, technical issues like that, in managing the risk of a payment on the Bitcoin network, and sort of closing that gap between the transaction first appearing and that 10-minute confirmation on the network.
Quickly, Ron, before you go, this is the kind of conversation you and I would typically have over a glass where we were marinating ice, but don't you think there's room, isn't it logical that we would see eventually a virtual currency without borders, given the state of the world and the technology?
Bill, in some senses, we already have one. It's called the U.S. dollar. It accounts for 65% of all global transactions. It's not always frictionless, which is what a lot of the Bitcoin folks like to have. There are fees associated with ATM or electronic usage, but you do have, your direct deposit is a frictionless moment in which you get money deposited in your account as an electronic entry. You use that in electronic fashion down the road. I mean, I think the real question is not so much about Bitcoin as an investment, but Bitcoin as a currency. And I think that sovereign entities will be very slow to allow Bitcoin to become the coin of the realm.
You're right, and Stephen, I know we got to go. Just real quick, can you clarify this? What do you think it is? Is it a commodity or is it a currency, or do those distinctions matter?
It's a protocol, and a lot of people don't realize that you can actually issue dollars on the Bitcoin network and use the Bitcoin network to transfer dollars.
Fascinating.
All right.
Thank you, Stephen. Thank you, Ron.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Have a good weekend, guys.
See you later.